Hi, if you're just starting out your 40K journey and you want to know the basic rules and tactics for the game, this is a good video for you. This is meant to be a short guide where we just graze the top layer of the rules so that you can get a basic idea of how everything works, and if you want to learn more, please check out my other videos. Currently we're at the end of 9th edition and the 10th edition is already on the horizon, but if you are in the future and you're playing another version of the game, I'm pretty sure that most of the things are gonna apply still. Before you start playing, you always need to set up the board. That's where the game always starts. It's essentially three things: surface on which you're gonna play, terrain, and objective markers. First, you select a table that's large enough for the game board. For games of 500 to 1000 points, you can use a 3 by 2 feet surface, like a kitchen table, something like that. But for your good big games like 2000 points matches, you need a 60 by 44-inch table. If you struggle to find that size somewhere in your house, that's perfectly okay, because that's quite a large surface and tables usually don't come in that surface. That's why you probably need to go to your local games club where they actually have surfaces of that size. Or you can try to find a rather cheap, about $200 or $300 foldable table if you are going to do Warhammer seriously and have some friends that you're gonna play with. That's maybe a good investment. Next, set up terrain pieces to add cover and line of sight blockers to your board. And that's very important because making the board flat without any terrain will give too much of an advantage to the player who goes first, usually, or to someone who has more shooting available in their army. Essentially, all models need to see the target that they are shooting at. That's why line of sight, line between the two models, is so important. You need to measure to actually check if one model can see another model, and that means that that model can shoot. Where cover is an additional, now in our edition currently, it's an additional +1 to your saving throw, so you actually reduce the armor penetration characteristic of the weapon that targets you, the shooting weapon that targets you. And then place objective markers on the board. Either use the current edition of the core rules or the most recent GT pack. The GT pack is what is mostly used in tournaments, and the core rules, it's for all your hobby players that don't really care about the newest and latest stuff. What is the objective mark? Essentially now it's a 40mm piece of plastic. It doesn't represent anything more than that physically, but in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the story, it represents an important thing to capture on the battlefield. It can be a cache of demolition charges that both forces want to get through to. It can be a data slate that contains vital information about that mission, that sector, and whoever gets to it first is gonna win an entire war, anything. And in most games of 40K, you're gonna score most of your points by interacting with those objective markers in some way, shape, or form. Usually it's scoring them, meaning that you have some models within 3 inches of the outer circumference of the objective marker in this current edition of 40K, or you are interacting with those markers by performing actions, so doing something while you're near them, or just simply getting rid of your opponent's units on those objectives. So it's safe to say objective markers are extremely important in 40K. Pick a mission, put markers down on the table as instructed in that mission. Now you cannot put them inside ruins, but it may change in the new edition of 40K, so you will see that in your mission and you're good to go. Next, a very, very powerful phase of the game, it's deployment phase. It's when you put your models on the table. If you want to learn how to do deployment in a very advanced way to win games, I recommend to watch my deployment phase guide, because I go very in depth on how to outmaneuver your opponent and to get the maximum out of that phase. But for now, we're just gonna do the basic overview. So yes, that's the phase where you put the models on the board, and your deployment strategy should take into account the strength and weaknesses of your army. You need to know your army very well, because that's how you determine how you put your models on the table, as well as take into account the terrain on the board. You should understand where you're going to be able to shoot, where you're going to be able to move, how far you're going to be able to move, where your opponent is probably going to go, and etc. Rules for deployment are going to be included with the mission, but generally speaking, there is a dedicated zone on each side of the board, and about 24 inches apart they are. So you have a 24-inch no man's land between those to make sure that the game does not turn into a bloody melee in the first second. I cannot overestimate how important deployment is, It is a phase that even players who have been playing for years and who are tournament winners are still mastering. It's very important. It's rather difficult to not make a mistake. Even very proficient players make mistakes, so don't worry if you make one. It's perfectly normal. It's part of your learning curve. And if you like this video and want to see more content like that, please subscribe and click the notifications bell to make sure you don't miss my new videos. After that, the game starts. It's divided into phases. Now we have this list of phases, pretty much. It's a slightly simplified version. In the 10th edition, we're probably going to see some changes to that. Like the psychic phase is already known to be gone from the game, but it doesn't matter. The concept is still the same. Turn proceeds through the phases, and the players alternate their turns. So first I go, then you go, and then I go again. There are 3 main phases in any turn. Main is, in this case, the phases where most of the stuff is actually happening, and these are movement, shooting, and charge. If you have psychers, you for now have the psychic phase as well. In the movement phase, you can move your units across the board according to their move characteristic in inches. You're gonna see that in your little data slate that you have in your codex or on your cards in 10th edition. They can also decide to advance instead of doing a normal move, which increases the distance by d6, but limits their abilities in the next phases. Like, you cannot charge usually unless you have a special rule after advancing. You cannot shoot most weapons after advancing, and so on and so forth. In the shooting phase, you can shoot at enemy units within range and line of sight. You select your unit, then you select targets for each gun in that unit. So if it's a tank, you can divide all of their guns into different targets. If it's a unit of 10 Space Marines, you can put each bolt gun into a different target, as long as all of them are within line of sight and range of those targets. Only one limitation: you cannot combine anything with grenades and pistols. So if a model uses a grenade or a pistol, that particular model cannot shoot anything else anymore for this particular shooting phase. It doesn't mean that all other models in the unit cannot use their guns. It's only this model that cannot do anything else. Check range and line of sight. Obviously, for all of them, roll to hit according to the ballistic skill of your models. So if you have ballistic skill 2+, then only ones are going to be misses. Obviously, if you have rerolls, you can reroll according to your rule. Roll to wound, comparing the strength of a gun and toughness of the target. If the toughness is equal to the strength, it's a 4+ to wound. If it's higher, the strength is higher, you need a 3+. If the strength is double, you need a 2+. If the strength is lower, you need a 5+. And if the strength is 1/2 of the toughness, you need a 6 to wound the target. Roll saves modified by the AP of the gun, unless it's an invulnerable save. So if you have 3+ save and AP1 gun is targeting your model, you need a 4+ save to successfully shrug off, so to speak, the wound. And if you roll a 1 or a 2 or a 3 in this case, you're going to suffer however much damage the gun actually deals. And allocate the wounds to your models in your unit, and you're done. And in the charge phase, you can attempt to charge enemy units within 12 inches of you. You don't need to see them. That's the one beauty of the charge phase. You can blind charge, so to speak, at least for now in 9th edition. And once within engagement range, proceed using the same method as with the shooting phase. So all that stuff applies as well. You're just using the weapon skill now. And if you want to learn more about the fight phase, which is probably the most difficult phase in the game, so don't worry that much if you don't understand for now what all these weird things are, like pile-ins, consolidations. That all comes naturally once you start playing. And if you want to expedite that process, watch my fight phase guide. It's a pretty good representation of how you can increase your chances to survive the fight phase and come out on top. And here are some basic tactics for you to make sure that your first or one of your first games of 40k is not a complete disaster and your forces are not utterly crushed. First, remember to protect your units with cover and make sure they're out of line of sight. Use terrain on the board to your advantage, blocking line of sight and forcing your opponent to come to you. Essentially, terrain allows you to pick the perfect time to strike or to be attacked. sometimes. Unless you get a clear benefit from putting your units in the open, there is no reason not to use terrain. Second, always be aware of the objectives on the board. Make sure you're moving towards them and scoring them. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen players who have been playing for a number of years now, they're not beginners, who have just completely forgotten that there are objectives on the board and you need to control them. They were so enamored by that process of rolling dice, targeting units, using stratagems and all that stuff, so they actually forgot that you win the game by scoring points. And the juiciest source to score those points are objective markers. Don't abandon them. Third, spend your resources wisely. Game of 40K is more or less resources management game. You manage resources of your time, you manage resources of your shooting, of your charging, of your units' wounds, and etc. Obviously, there are millions of things you can do wrong in that sense, but here are a couple of examples of what you shouldn't do. Don't shoot the stuff you should charge, because that's obviously wasting your resources. When you can kill something in combat, then you can relocate that shooting to kill something else that is important. Don't stand still with a unit that can move, because you never know when you're gonna need some unit in, for example, center of the board. So keeping someone close by and using your entire move characteristic and even advancing if that unit doesn't need to shoot or charge is a good way to manage your resources. Don't engage units unless there is a good reason to, a benefit to gain. So charging a small infantry squad into a huge unit of Terminators, which they're gonna just be butchered, is probably not a good idea unless, for example, that unit of infantry is big enough, you know for a fact that it's big enough to withstand the charge and to stay on that objective which the Terminators are controlling, and you're gonna outscore them at the end of the fight phase. It's a risky tactic, but at least you have a plan, you have a benefit to gain. If you don't have a benefit to gain, then don't do it. So if you want to learn more about that stuff, again, watch my top 10 tips for noobs video. I go through 10 things that are gonna actually make you a better player in 40K, and you're gonna see results pretty quickly if you actually implement those ideas. Remember that the best way to improve is to practice. So get out there and play some games. Don't just watch battle reports or paint, collect miniatures. There's nothing bad in doing that, but I'm pretty sure that you're going to enjoy all these other things like reading books, watching YouTube videos and all that stuff if you actually engage in the game in real life as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask people in the club or me in the comments. I'm always here to answer your questions if you have some. And don't be shy. This is a social hobby, so everyone is expecting you to engage. And most importantly, here is the most important rule: you should enjoy the game, because it's actually a game. It's not something that you should be torturing yourself with. Don't start collecting affection just because someone told you they're strong now. Collecting should always be about joy and happiness, and you should choose models and factions that make you happy, play missions and narratives that make you happy. And then, if you want to win more games, come over to my channel's tactics videos, and I'll do my best to explain how you can win more games. But the first thing you should concentrate on is to find something that makes you happier as a 40K collector. I hope this video was useful for you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell, and I'll see you next time.